Automobile showrooms are going virtual, and many are positive that it may soon take over the space of brick and mortar dealerships. The next session has been prepared by keeping this development in mind. Please put your hands together for this session's moderator, Courtney White, who will initiate the proceedings on the topic Digital Dealerships, Framing the Latest Dealership Strategies.
All right, we're ready to go. Hello, everybody, all the way in the back. Thanks so much. Yes, exactly. Thanks so much for joining us today. As she said, we'll be discussing the digital dealership, framing the latest dealership strategies. Prior to 2021, the automotive industry in particular was a bit resistant to delivering on the promise of digital transformation. The way that we sold, serviced, and delivered vehicles really remained the same for a very long time. But in the last year, the pandemic has forced many to adopt digital tools that streamline operations, enable contactless and out-of-dealership experiences, and ultimately have driven a more customer-centric model that I, for one, am hoping is here to stay. So today, I'm excited. We're about to unpack some of the trends that we've been seeing and how those trends will really inform what we talk about as the new future of retail automotive. Before I get started, I'm going to go ahead and allow the panel to introduce themselves, but just to kind of give you guys an idea of how I think that we should run this, we'll talk a little bit about it and then hand it over to you for any questions that you've got. So thanks again for joining us. And with that, I'll go ahead and start with you, Edwin.
Hey everybody, my name is Edwin Castro, Next Reality founder and CEO, also Castro Automotive franchise owner. What our team does and what we have developed is a digital solution for e-commerce and Next XR, which is in the VR market for those who are not familiar. And we digitize and virtualize everything, any offerings or products that you might have, making it easier for Gen Y, Gen Z, and Millennials to make that purchase in a more informed way and decisions that will affect many retailers and distributors. So.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sharon Kitzman. I'm president of Dominion DMS. For those of you less familiar on the dealer side of this industry, DMS is a pretty well-known term for them. It stands for Dealer Management System, and it's effectively an ERP system for the small businesses that the dealers run. We connect the OEM to the dealer for all of their data processing, as well as to over 300 different third parties that they might use, because the DMS is seen as the database of record within the dealership. From a digitizing perspective of the auto industry, we're the ones that still print impact forms when you buy a car and require you to wet ink signature that form in multi-part, so you have to press really hard. We've seen a lot of encouraging trends over the last year, as Courtney mentioned, and we're excited to accelerate that process going forward.
Sounds like a TPS report. Hey everybody, I'm Russ Lemmer. I've been in the industry for about a decade now and started with a crazy idea that we could disrupt the airport car rental business with a company called Silvercar, which we founded in early 2012. The idea there was that renting a car at the airport is frankly a terrible experience. And I think most of us have lived that terrible experience. And it was really centered on two big problems. One was you never knew what car you were going to get, right? So you signed up for this or something similar, and you always got the something similar, and it drove a lot of people to frustration. And then the whole consumer layer they wrapped around it was typically booby-trapped and frustrating, right? It was confusing gas packages or insurance upsells. You waited in lines in different times. You also had to sign in triplicate. And so the two things that we introduced are, one, a single make and model inventory, so the silver Audi A4 at all 28 airport locations, all the exact same. So any car you chose was the one you expected to get. And then two, we tried to solve a lot of that friction and frustration out of the process by putting the entire consumer layer into a mobile app, which was pretty radical in 2012. Seems pretty standard these days. But you could actually use embedded telematics and machine-to-mobile technology to get the phone to talk to the car. So if you had the reservation, you could unlock it with your phone, and you didn't have to deal with counters and lines and tiger teeth and all that stuff. We grew it to a pretty healthy size. We ended up selling the business to Audi itself, and along the way, we learned a lot about technology, fleet management, and telematics, and that would give birth to a company that I now help run called Dealerware. And we take a lot of the know-how and the software that we use for fleet management, and we sell it back into dealerships and manufacturers to say, hey, how do we reduce the cost or the total cost of managing all of the vehicles on your lot, whether they be out on loan, whether they just be sitting there for multiple days, whether you have a customer that comes in and says, hey, I want to see the blue one, and you have 5 different lots, some are in the basement, some are underground, some are in a garage, and you need to go find the blue car and you don't know where it is. Literally a dude, where's my car moment. They can impact the sale. We help dealers make sense of a lot of that through embedded telemetry technology, but ultimately delivered, again, on the phone in a product way that makes sense. So it's not super sophisticated or technical. It's very easy to drive to insight and ultimately saves them tens of thousands of dollars a month. And we've been able to scale that pretty effectively, and we work with most major brands that you see on the hood ornaments of cars today.
Well, thank you, three. I'm looking forward to hearing your different perspectives as we walk through some of these questions. So the first one, as I mentioned in the beginning, the digital dealership isn't necessarily a new concept, but the acceleration of digitalization as a result of COVID has been pretty enormous. So Russ, I'll start out with you. What are some of the most exciting trends you've seen in the last year?
I think the biggest one that we've seen, and certainly the most exciting from a customer experience perspective, is the idea, what we'd call out-of-dealership experiences, right? I think if you look at most consumer sentiment surveys, people don't like going into the dealership, right? They get their crocodile brain going, it's fight or flight. They think that they're gonna get scammed out of extra money that they shouldn't have to pay for service or F&I or whatever it is when they're buying their vehicle. They're much more comfortable at home. And one of the things that I know that dealers don't do is typically elect into new types of service models unless they're forced to, right? So they can be manufacturer driven, or once every 100 years, you could get a global pandemic that literally shuts you down and doesn't allow for people to come into your store and interact in the ways that they used to. And so what the dealerships did was they had to evolve, right? They now had to do what Amazon has gotten famous for. Instead of making you come to the product, they took the product to you. And to be able to do that, they had to get rid of forms that you signed in triplicate where you passed a PIN back and forth, and they had to start developing things like contactless contracts, right? How can I initiate a service repair order with a customer from 6 feet away if we're never sharing any of the same materials? And with more difficulty, how do I do that in their driveway instead of my service drive? So that, I think, is the most exciting one. People love being in their slippers at home, having business conducted either on their phone or in their own driveway, and they hate going across down to that dealership where they think that all things being equal, somebody's out to get them and try and monetize them a little bit more than they're ready to be monetized. And I think that tipped the scale of power, and I hope it's a trend that we continue to see, but that's the big one for me.
Great. Sharon, anything to add?
Yeah, I love Marissa's comment about out of the dealership experience, and I've tried to have many of those myself, and somehow you keep getting dragged back in. But I think the acceleration of features that technology providers like us and Edwin have delivered to dealers years ago, all of a sudden got adopted this past year. The ability to, for the consumer to scan a credit card through an app and deliver payment against a part that they ordered or a service that they had done. The ability for the service technician to get in a truck and go to the consumers location and perform that service. It's kind of a little known fact. There's over 300 service repairs that can be done in your driveway. Yet most people take their vehicle to a dealership. So they had to evolve, and they had to do it quickly because at the end of the day, they're small business owners and they operate like the rest of us on profit margin, and they saw it dry up almost immediately in April and May and had to react quickly. By mid-May or so, I saw a lot of these trends, I'm sorry, that's 2020, mid-May 2020, a lot of these trends start to accelerate. But what's important to note is that it's functionality that was available to them the entire time. Just to your point, Courtney, they're just slow or slower to adopt it.
Yeah, and what I'm sure for you, particularly with integrated reality and some of the things that you're bringing to market, what are some of the trends that you've seen even with responsiveness to your new technology as it relates to COVID?
Well, prior to the acceleration of everything being digitized, or whether they're vehicle fleets or rentals or even houses, products and services, I see it more. Before, it used to be kind of like a niche or kind of like a thing that was, oh well, that's cool and everything, but that's not my cup of tea. Or however, now it's kind of like, hey, what was your name again? Like, can you do that for us? So because all the trends are moving more digital, and you got to remember, it's at least 51% of people that don't mind having an immersive experience, a digital or virtual experience, to kind of make a educated buying decision. With that, we're talking about Gen Z, Gen Y, Millennials, and everybody just, knowing the technology. They're I think one of the gentlemen said yesterday, they're born into it. So that's kind of like a normal type thing. And as we keep moving, even post-COVID, right, that's accelerating the trend way further than it should. Well, it's kind of like a bad thing for the ones that don't want to change, but a good thing for those that could captivate that change. So,
yeah, that's a great point, and actually is a nice segue into my next question. So we do talk so much about the new normal, and however we see vaccines rolling out, hey-oh, very few masks in the audience right now. How great is it to be able to breathe again? And states have been opening up. So do you think that automotive retailers and the automotive industry in general will continue to aggressively adopt digitalization? And in what areas do you think it will be most prevalent?
I believe that OEMs will probably, have an advantage because they have more resources. They have a stronger presence in finance and more influence, whether it's from Formula One or your ad on a bus. But it's technologies like Next Reality that could actually make room and make it an even scale for the little guy to come in, or the little guy, the dealerships, the local dealerships, to upload their products and just be able to offer their services in a contactless form. It's seamless, almost seamless, right? And then you have your applications that do a touchless agreement. And once you have all that in place, then it's a new infrastructure for business. So whether you're a new company, an older company, you're dealing with fleets and or OEMs or used vehicles, it's applicable to almost everyone. Yeah.
Great. Sharon, Russ, anything to add?
Yeah, I think, Vroom and Carvana are here to stay, and I think they made huge gains over the last 18 months. When you take out a Super Bowl ad, you mean business on the disruption platform. So I think dealers, in addition to having to readily adopt a digital strategy, which they avoided in the past, saw new entrants completely disrupt their model and make it easy for a consumer to buy a vehicle. Granted, it's a used vehicle right now, but it's still an easier process, and so they're going to have to continue that evolution in order to be able to compete even after the pandemic, because those competitors are now in their space and fighting for their consumer.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think one of the things that we'll see, and maybe one of the things I worry about given where we are, is you'll see a reversion to the mean, right? And I think you'll see that those that were progressive before the pandemic continue to be progressive and adopt digital technologies, new types of experiences, innovative ways to compete with the Vrooms and the Carvanas. And those that were the crusty stalwarts, the Luddites that didn't want to embrace technology, are now going to soften their grip on it a little bit. And I think so much of that comes from where we are literally right now in this Goldilocks dealership environment where cars are selling for over sticker price. There's competitive bid processes on vehicles just like there is in the real estate market. And they don't have to adopt because literally they can draw up a contract with a napkin and crayon and people will transfer the money over. And so I think that there's a moment in time where everybody, whether they were comfortable or not, was pulled forward about 7 to 10 years with COVID. And I think now, given the economic environment, the retail unit shortage, and a couple other things going on, there's a few that will be excused to fall back into what we would probably say feel like old analog ways.
Yeah, actually, that brings up a great point. So 2 years ago, I actually remember seeing you on stage, Russ, talking about decline in sales, vehicle sales. And now, as you mentioned, today dealerships can't even keep enough vehicles on their lot to meet sales demand. And I think that there's obviously a lot of things that go into that as we look at people moving from urban areas to more suburban areas, people picking up cars instead of reducing cars, but we cannot deny that this chip shortage is a huge part of that. So as we get into 2022 and beyond, and we actually have the ability to manufacture vehicles at a higher rate, do you see industry shifts then? Are there going to be areas that potentially dealers have been adopting now that they'll need to really embrace as there are maybe more vehicles than there is demand once again?
The answer is yes. Where and how much they embrace and invest in these things, I think, is the question. No doubt right now, when you're at such a significant surplus of demand, life is easy. But when you come back to a world where, now typically the pendulum swings, it never relaxes in the middle and everybody chills out. So at some point, people are going to, just like lumber, they're going to manufacture too many vehicles, and then we're going to end up with this glut of vehicles. And then I think you'll hear hot words like mobility pick up again, because now we have all these vehicles. Maybe we can rent them out to people. Maybe we don't have to sell them. Maybe people will be interested in subscription. What were those technologies Russ was selling 3 years ago that never really picked up, but now are relevant again? I think that you'll see some more exploration and experimentation. I think some of the challenge in this market, though, having been in it as long as I have and just seeing the power struggles, is franchise law, OEM versus dealership. The OEMs really want the new, fully digital, immersive experiences, and the dealers are like, nah. That's what it feels like. And they're still building their $15, $20 million Taj Mahal dealerships on the side of the highway when nobody wants to go into the dealership, right? They want that car brought back to them. So I think that you'll see small and steady pickups of things like fleet management, exploration into, hey, can I rent to own in a way that doesn't feel like a ironclad 3 or 4 year lease like we've seen now. And then I think you'll see what these guys have gotten a taste of. Dealers typically speak one language and one language only. That's profits. Is that when they use digital tools, they get more efficient. They can do more with fewer resources. And all of a sudden, they start to see a little bit of that surplus. Those that are progressive will continue to explore that. And I think that we'll see them set the new line in terms of where we go next from a digital perspective.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that they see their profits eroding, right, in the digital space. The efficiency gain is a good one, but I think that you have to put them in the box and beat them up for 30 minutes before you're going to get the profit out of that deal. And that's not what this digital adoption generation, call them millennials, call them whatever you want to call them, because I think over the last year, it's broadened, right? My mom does stuff online now, as an example, right? So to shift them mentally from where they've always known their profitability to be will bring them back to the mean in some cases. But I also think that the consolidation in the market will continue, and the more progressive dealers will continue to buy the less progressive dealers out of those franchise agreements, and therefore the more progressive will get bigger. The Taj Mahal on the side of the road that they've built historically is also mandated by the OEM, right? That franchise OEM relationship continues to struggle, and most recently, some of the largest manufacturers in our industry have announced circumventing the dealer network altogether with their EV launches. And I think that's an effort for them to get around some of those old dealer practices that the consumer doesn't want, especially the consumer that they're targeting with an EV.
Well, as you know, my president, my chain supply president, yesterday spoke about Mr. Jonathan Call. He had mentioned about the supply chain regarding the chip supply shortage. You know, that's a problem also in itself, where COVID and, you know, not whether there were natural disasters, COVID and whatnot, we need to update infrastructure prior to an actual vehicle being made, right? You have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. And this is just an eye-opener for a lot of industries, and really it pinpoints their weak points, right? Not only is innovation happening, but there's also a shift, a paradigm shift, where it has, you know, you have to make that move in digitization, whether you're in dealerships, whether you're in sales, you know, it's just, and also chain supply, you know, everything. So my opinion on, you know, cars being, like you said, like too many cars being made, and they're overcompensating for the lack thereof at the time of now. That's where, you know, OEMs are, like you said, OEMs are really going to take advantage of that. And, you know, why wouldn't they as a business, right? If you want to survive, sometimes, what happened to the cart, the person that made the cart that was pulling with horses back in 1900s, you know, like, did they turn into an automaker? You know, it's that kind of question. It's like, you have to kind of find your niche. It might be a niche, it might be a technology, it might be something that hasn't been done yet, or find solutions that are problems that are still coming forth in all this disruption. And mobility, the infrastructure for mobility, the connectivity for mobility, for vehicle to vehicle, you're already kind of doing the infrastructure with the fleet management. You know how many cars are on the road, you know who has access to these vehicles, so you're without even really realizing, you're already making a network there, you know. So that's my.
And we mentioned Vroom and Carvana a bit, and obviously we've known for years they've really been trying to upend the traditional dealership model. I think, to your point, Sharon, we've seen Super Bowl ads, a ton of marketing all around how terrible the dealership is, and really what they're able to do just on their phone and never walking into the dealership. So what do dealerships need to think about in order to remain relevant and competitive when you think about a world in which there is the Vrooms and Carvanas really coming into frame, maybe for consumers, more so than they were 2-3 years ago?
I don't see a reason why a dealership can't do what Carvana and Vroom are doing, right? Their units are already on a website. They already have a digital footprint to market to the consumer, and they can certainly find ways, including the delivery of the vehicle to the consumer, or the 10-day wait and see period, or try and buy, or whatever they're calling it. They could do all those things if they got out, you know, of their own way and evaluated some of the things to Russ's point earlier, that consumers really hate about going into the dealership. And so I think they're going to, the smarter ones, the more progressive ones are going to evaluate that and recognize the business loss that they're giving up to some of those other new competitors in their market and find ways to directly compete with them. The Super Bowl ads, to your point, are not just promoting those companies. They're taking a shot at the dealership, a pretty rough one, in how consumers perceive that dealership experience and environment. And I hope, it's certainly not how the majority of the dealers operate today, but I do hope that it was a bit of a wake-up call for them, and they could take a really effective look at their operating processes and the things that the consumers dislike about them the most, and correct them and get creative to do it.
Yeah, I think those two, Vroom and Carvana, are super interesting because I think there's an ongoing question or debate. Are they disrupting the traditional dealer model? And to me, it's not a debate. They've disrupted it. I think these guys were making fun of me because I was scribbling notes before we got up here. But I was just checking the market cap of these companies relative to the biggest dealer groups in the US, right? And Carvana itself is market capped over $50 billion. And the largest dealer group in the US, AutoNation, is about $7 billion. And if you had invested $1 in Carvana when it IPO'd in 2017, at the same time you invested $1 in AutoNation in 2017, AutoNation, you'd have doubled your money and gone from 1 to 2. And in Carvana, you'd have gotten 30x your money, right? So when you think about profits, when you think about innovation, the stock market notices and it rewards. And this is one of the things that I have talked about before. It is mind-blowing the dealers don't move more quickly because Carvana and Vroom are selling the exact same SKUs that are on the dealer's lots from a used vehicle perspective. They don't have a new widget or a new gimmick. They have their own version of the wild balloon hands man with their vending machine towers that maybe you've seen if you drive by. But other than that, the only thing that they've really introduced is a better buying experience, right? And I think it's relevant today. We did some studies in 2017 when we were looking at the idea of mobility and subscription and just car buying in general. And the fact is, we're in Las Vegas, right? So when you think about the term dealer, you typically think at risk. I'm going to approach this dealer and I'm going to put some money down and I might win, but I'm probably going to lose, right? You go to a car dealer and you almost feel the exact same emotion. I'm going to put some money down, I might win, but I'm probably going to lose. And consumers don't want to go to the car dealer. Look at Tesla. They want to go to the car store. They want to go to the Apple store. And I think that Carvana and Vroom have tapped into this. Well, we don't necessarily have to build the car store. We can just take the car to the customer and the store can live online. And there's so much power in that model, especially because I think about 90% of the purchase decision at this point is made before a customer ever steps foot in that dealership. So what are you really doing, again, with these Taj Mahals for that last 10%, other than probably, to Sharon's point, getting in your own way? Trying to stuff them in the box of F&I and upsell them on the Bang & Olufsen sound system for another $3K that they don't want to buy. It is the Amazon principle: start with what the customer wants and work backwards from there. And the problem with dealers and manufacturers is they've always started with the profit or the manufacturer incentive first and worked backward from there. And that's why we've seen so many things like, I would say, a corruption of the model. When you buy a $50,000 car, you drive it off the lot, and then it's worth $38,000. And it's like, well, why is that? And really, you've just solved for the manufacturer's profit margin, and that's it. So I think that hopefully these are watershed moments and beacon-like companies that can affect some of the retail buying behaviors and the retail selling behaviors in automotive. I think that there's significant opportunity out there. I think the playbook already exists. All you have to do is maybe dust it off and pay attention, and you could unlock a significant amount of value if you're a traditional dealership.
One thing I think all three of you have mentioned in different flavors, which actually brings me to my next point, that it's been so long since we've been able to attend live conferences, but prior to that, I felt like you couldn't throw a stone without hitting the word mobility. With that being said, there's definitely mixed opinions and I think probably mixed definitions of what that term mobility means. And I'd love to go through with each one of you, talk a little bit about what mobility means to you and how we kind of can make a little bit more sense of it.
Yeah, I'll kick it off because I've talked about this before, and I've said that mobility has turned into a 4-letter word that nobody really likes or can articulate. The way that I frame it and think about it is it's car as a service, and there are really 2 flavors of that. There are rides and there are drives. So your ride share, your Ubers, your Lyfts, right? Those are in the ride section, and then mobility as far as drives are concerned, where you're behind the wheel. That's your car to go. That's your zip car. That is the ad nauseum number of manufacturer programs you've seen roll out, from Book by Cadillac to Volvo Care to these other type of subscription models that even Audi has come up with. And they all call it mobility because I don't think that they have a better term. Really what they were trying to do is figure out some way to grow, right? They saw things like, hey, car rental, they can make a lot of money if they do things right with the right economic environment. We're sitting on surplus cars. How might we further extend what I would call the share of wallet? So, hey, if we sell an Audi to a customer and they pay us $60,000 for that car, but then when they travel, they go to Hertz, and then they spend, I don't know, let's say over 10 years, another $10,000 with Hertz. How can we incrementally creep up on that share of wallet? How can we pull some of that $10,000 back, keep somebody in an Audi the whole time? And we won't call it rental because that's another dirty word. Let's call it mobility. And so you had these experiments, and I think that they were interesting. What we have found, and we have done all the studies and certainly read all the reports, is that mobility or subscriptions or any of this stuff from a new car perspective just doesn't work because the cost of depreciation is so expensive. You can't introduce a subscription-like product where you get car and insurance and all the things for, call it $500 a month, and then turn around and retail that car in a year, 2 years, 3 years in a way that you can actually make over those 3 years the same amount of margin that you otherwise would have if you had just sold the car new with all the incentives and everything else going on. I think it's incredibly interesting in the used space. But again, manufacturers don't make money on used cars, right? And so I think that's where the dealership has an interesting role to play, because there is no reason to me that if I totaled my Toyota and I take it into Toyota to do all the work, that they then have to drive me over to Enterprise to rent a car when they have 600 used cars on their lots that are all Toyotas, probably the same make and model that I just totaled, and they could keep me in that brand instead of realizing they have about 24% leakage when they take somebody to Enterprise. They put them in a Hyundai, and they're like, this Hyundai's pretty good, And then maybe I could save $1,000 or $2 once I get my insurance checked. So there are interesting, the word that I hate is use cases, but I'll use it. There are interesting use cases for mobility that I think need to be articulated, defined, and presented to a customer, where it's like, hey, instead of dealing with Hertz, Local Edition, or Enterprise, you could come to the dealership and have a full turnkey insurance replacement thing done in a way that you don't have to manage 2 or 3 vendors, you just have to deal with the dealership, and wouldn't that be easier? So I think that there are aspects of it that I like, but there's a lot of it that I hate.
Sharon, are you love or hate on mobility?
I'm certainly not the expert in it like Russ is. I think from our perspective as a DMS business, it's similar to the glut situation that we talked about earlier with the chip shortage. Dealers kind of moved away in general from having rental fleets or loaner fleets 8 years ago because it was just easier to Uber your way out of their waiting room back to your business or office or home or whatever. And then all of a sudden, no one wanted to get in an Uber because it could be contaminated, right? And so then they had to scurry around and figure out a rental affiliate. And you're right, you could be putting a Toyota client in a Hyundai or worse, right? A Nissan. And we'll see whether it goes back to the mean again. So I do think, though, that there are very few consumers. It's probably a portion of the demographic, but there are very few consumers who want to wait in the dealer's service waiting room while their vehicle's being repaired. They want to get out of there, and they're going to find the way to get out of there, whether it's overnight and it could be solved by another mobile solution for them, or whether it's a couple hours.
Well, yes. So, mobility, yeah, is that term has just been thrown around everywhere, from car rentals to ride hailing and e-bikes, micromobility, yeah. The scooters and everything. That's micromobility in the city, right? But mobility is kind of, so it's a unification. It's those blurred lines, between the technology, the communication from vehicle to vehicle, and it's also the, the self-driving vehicle or the full autonomous vehicles. And it's all of those ride-hailing, everything just put together. So there's already, you could go onto your iPhone maps and you say, oh, well, I want to go here. And it has the walking, it has the driving, it has the ride-hailing, the public transportation. But now there's going to be something that comes together and just puts that all together. Yeah, there's still going to be people maybe Ubering you around for the next 5-10 years, but it's going to be a point where you just, I want to go here. Boom. You click on it. It gives you the cost. It gives you everything. And you get picked up by a self-driving vehicle. There's going to be that. You have a bike lane now. You're going to have an EV lane. And that's part of infrastructure for the city or municipalities, government. It's that simple. For me, it's that simple. I've kind of thought this all the way through, especially with Next, just because it's a tech company, right? We have developers and everything. But the thing with that, and then people are just going to be freely moving around. You remember those clips? I mean, I'm pretty sure you guys can remember, like, cities of the future. Now it's like something that it's trending. People are really talking about this. So just like we're the movers and shakers of our industry, well, guess what? Those people in that industry, in futures of the city, they're going to eventually talk to somebody in the tech space that's in the automotive space that's going to just close the gap. And that's where mobility options for whatever vehicles, whether they're OEM or used, are going to come in and just use the infrastructure that's already set in place. And that, I feel that mobility is not only going to stop CO2 emissions going crazy, and if you really want to do something about it, do something about it. Don't just talk about it. That's our directive or our responsibility, us as the people that are on the forefront of the automotive industry, to really grasp and take a hold of and take some direction.
Yeah, and as you talk about cities of the future, it has been interesting. So I live in Austin, Texas, and the number of people that have been moving to Austin, Texas, some of these sort of mid-sized cities that are a lot more sort of suburban, potentially, than a New York or a Los Angeles, when they really can work from anywhere. But living in Austin, Texas without having a car means that you pretty much just live right in downtown Austin, Texas. You need a vehicle to be able to get around. And so we hear a lot, or have heard a lot, about millennials, Gen Z, Gen Y, questioning previously whether they even needed to own a car. They grew up very much in a world where they could use their phone to hail a ride, and it wasn't their mom or their dad who was giving them that ride. So you talked a little bit, Russ, about share of wallet, right? How do we think about capturing more of that Gen Z, Gen Y, millennial share of wallet? What are the things automotive retailers should be thinking about when it comes to their preferences and buying behaviors?
It's a good question, and I don't think that they know yet, to be honest. And I think that, we're looking at a new world order post-pandemic than what we thought we were looking at in 2019. As the world was urbanizing, everybody was moving downtown, cities were starting to look more like Hong Kong and less like Des Moines, right, which were big and expansive. And now you're seeing the opposite, right? So suburban sprawl, as you said, necessarily dictates the idea that you have to have a car, or you're going to be stuck, or now actually Uber doesn't become as economical as you once thought it was. Like, it's better to own or to lease. And so I think as you see these demographic profiles changing, so too must you then realize that they're going to be consuming or buying different products. to me, it plays right into the OEM's hands. They're just going to continue to make cars in volume. And I think at some point, right, I guess autonomous is kind of neat, but to me, that's a cost optimization problem. That's not a customer experience problem that anybody's solving for. So I don't think it really changes what it is that we're going to buy. It just means that there's one less human in the car as we're scrolling social media, getting driven around. Autonomous is already here, right? There's a guy in the front seat that just drives you everywhere you want to go and you don't pay attention. So it's not clear to me that that's going to be some sort of significant unlock. But again, I said it before about the Amazon thing, like start with what the customers want. And I think we're slowly realizing that, hey, maybe the millennials aren't so opposed to buying or leasing cars, especially as they, for the first time ever, get married, have families, realize that moving around in car seats is actually a giant pain in the ass if you're trying to Uber everywhere, and you're having less density in the cities, therefore necessitating better transit via car. And again, you're not going to use buses, or at least there'll be less of a population that uses buses because you can have communicable diseases on buses. So I think that plays into the manufacturer's hands, but I think it still presents itself an interesting tension between the Carvanas and the traditional dealerships, right? How are you going to optimize your buying experience if you just want that single unit where you turn it on and you can get yourself from A to B?
And Edwin, I know you really work on probably, as you were saying earlier, millennials, Gen Z, Gen Y, I mean, they want to consume things really from their phone, not even leaving their couch. So as you think about that and the ways in which retail automotives or OEMs can be serving those Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen X's, what are some of the things you're thinking around that?
Well, honestly, I like fast cars. So I like real powerful, torquey, fast cars.
There's a movie that just came out for you,
Yeah?
if you haven't seen it yet.
What is it?
Fast 9.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I got to check it out. I actually know Noel G, the Hector.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, I know him personally. He's cool. Shout out. But, no, honestly, and that's just, that's a preference thing. I think we were born into the culture of, the car, the muscle car, the sports car, or whatnot, right? But that's, again, my preference. Now, like, imagine the soccer mom, she doesn't no longer have to drive her car. Now she has the van, the self-driving autonomous van, taking the kids to the soccer game, and she's paying attention to all of them. Hey, stop fighting. Hey, this, that, and the third, and that, but it's going to be, again, a thing of preference, right? OEMs will continue to develop and research and do their what the buyer wants. And as I'm focused on the consumer to manufacturing, I believe that's going to continue to be a growing trend. Now, there are going to be, vehicle purchasing is never going to stop. Like, we still have to get around, no matter how you look at it, whether it's mobility, self-driving, or, gas or electric. However, it's all, especially for the new generation, they're more eco-friendly. They're more, yeah, we want fast, but guess what? They got the electric Porsche, the hybrid Porsche that's, it's a turbo, but it was named a turbo, but it's a full electric, and then you got the Tesla, the Roadster. It's zooming, doing 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds, 2.7 seconds. So it's just like, you still get what you want, but you get to be conservative with it. And with those vehicles, I believe you might have the option of mobility as well. So, you get to have your cake and eat it too. Yeah.
So my last question before we turn it over to the audience for any questions that you have, we've talked, I think, throughout this a bit about Amazon. I don't think that we can possibly talk about disruption of retail without having a conversation about Amazon. So for years, they've really redefined the way that customers interact with retailers. And what are some of the learnings that we can take from the Amazon model, but also what are some of the things that we may want to be weary of?
I'd say start with the customer and solve backwards. I think Amazon does that better than anybody. That's been the foundation of their growth over the last 25, 26 years. The one thought exercise that I like, much like we saw, rewind the clock 15 years ago, and you were watching the local news, they would tell you to check out their WAXN.com, right? And you could get all the local news there. And then what they started doing is saying, go to facebook.com and like our page, right? And social media became the on-ramp to the internet. And I think what you're seeing with Amazon is Amazon has become the on-ramp to e-commerce. And they've done some really interesting and innovative things, and they've put stuff in our homes where, it seems very easy to say, hey, Alexa, set the timer for 5 minutes, and then you get a 5-minute timer. I think what's more provocative and interesting is Amazon starts to learn your buying behavior, and they become more and more the on-ramp to commerce, is to say, hey, Amazon, I'm having a baby, or Alexa, I'm having a baby and I need a car, right? And then if Alexa can go out, or Amazon can broker deals with local dealerships to then say, hey, you should go get this Honda or that Toyota because this is the price point, things like that. They can, one, generate tons of money through affiliate marketing and take their lead. But two, they can start to steer your buying decision and completely intermediate the brand decision. And I mean, these brands, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars a year to try and convince you through a funny Super Bowl ad that you should buy a Toyota. And if you're just going to be in your kitchen saying like, hey, I need a new car, Alexa, what's the best deal? Or I want to go from my cool sports car to the minivan because I'm going to be a family man. Amazon has a tremendous amount of power, and I think they could very easily disrupt a lot of the purchasing cycle that goes into a more direct relationship that the OEMs have always wanted.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. If I think back to my first couple purchases on Amazon, they're pretty low dollar. A new phone cable or something pretty innocuous when you think about the complexity of the purchase and very low dollar. And over the last couple of years, as I get more and more comfortable with the quality and the delivery mechanism, I keep moving up on the cost and the complexity, whether it's a television or a new Microsoft Surface or whatever it happens to be. It's kind of the first go-to for internet shopping. And so as consumers leverage it as 100% of their go-to, they'll get more comfortable buying something as expensive as a $50,000 vehicle and as complicated as different horsepower or EV specifications or whatever it is going to be, and they'll start to leverage the AI that's built into Amazon, like Alexa, to help them through that decision process. So I do think it's a threat. It's certainly here to stay, and I imagine there are people at Amazon right now thinking about how to tackle some of these consumer purchases that they don't have control over today.
Can you guys imagine how much stuff is sitting in these warehouses of Amazon that haven't, or their affiliate warehouses that just house things that haven't even been bought, that they hope they buy, right? So they're selling in bulk. Now imagine a world where it's made to specification, not in bulk. Imagine the greener the world's gonna be just with that. So that's the Amazon right now. Yeah, I'm pretty sure if they're here to stay. I understand that. That's like a Google. That's like but there was AOL at one point. There was a MySpace at one point. There, everything has an age, right? So the age for Amazon is now. But guess what? We're going into a new age with all this disruption. My opinion on it. And China's already doing it. They started 2019, and the consumer to manufacturer model started in 2019. I think they did 2.6 billion from 2019, 2020. During the pandemic, 2020, 2021, it jumped up to 6.7 billion. So this is a trend that not only will bring jobs back to America, because now we have these facilities that will make to order, right, products and that in that case, but people will love it, because if I'm buying a product or I'm making the decision to buy this versus this, well, was this just made fresh for me, or was this just already sitting somewhere, right? And is this impactful to the world, to the world's health? Or is this, just a grand scale type product that was made, and I just happened to grab one of them. So there's all these different viewpoints in how you make that purchase, but Amazon did do its thing. It started off with the books and evolved into something totally different. Just the same way Netflix killed off Redbox, Blockbuster, all these other things. And now we're going into a new tech space, in that whatever space that is able to grasp the whole automotive industry, then that's going to be it, especially in the mobility sector. So.
Well, thank you, three. I want to go ahead and open it up. I'm getting the pulling us off stage. I was nervous we wouldn't have enough to cover, but these people have some opinions. But if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yep, my name's Colby. This one's specifically for Sharon and Russ, just in the dealer space. So you mentioned, Russ, back going to 2017, the IPO with Carvana, and I remember Mike Jackson, the CEO of AutoNation, said 99% of people want to buy cars in person. They want to go to the dealerships, right? But then 2020 just proved Carvana was just below CarMax for the most used cars sold for all of 2020. So they've now proved that wrong. So my question to you guys is, being that you're both dealer-centric, right? What is it? People visit 1.2 dealers before they buy a car now. So they've already made that educated decision of what they're going to buy before they even walk into that dealership. How are you guys able to change that dealer experience or give you that value add to a dealer to make sure that people do want to start coming back into their stores?
Yeah, the thing where our bread and butter, our core product, is really related to service and not sales. So you go into a dealership, you buy a car, you typically own that car for somewhere between 4 and 7 years. But during that cycle, you come in for service between 5 and 10 times, right? So your service experience with that brand is going to have a much bigger impact on you and your likelihood to be loyal and come back and buy again than that original purchase decision. So some of the stuff that we had talked about, how do you make service not suck as much as it currently does today? People don't want to be stuck, as Sharon said, at the dealership for 4 hours at a time when they're getting their oil changed. So how do you take the product to them, right? If you can do 300 different types of service in a customer's driveway, do that. And more importantly, that's really your right to win as a dealership over a Carvana or a Vroom, right? I have no doubt that they will continue to reinvest or raise more money to expand their ability to service, right? Because that's, again, we talk about share of wallet, that's a huge piece. But right now, the dealers do that better than anyone, anywhere. And so if they can continue to deliver on a service experience, whether it's through loaner cars, whether it's through Uber and Lyft credits, whether it's through just bringing it to you instead of requiring you to come there, cheaper prices, innovative warranties, things like that, you're going to have a far bigger effect on positive consumer sentiment that will lead in time to loyalty than you will just affecting that original purchase decision. So if I'm advising a dealership, I continue to tell them to double down in the investments they make in the service experience over just what feels like the commoditized buying experience, because you don't really have to invest in the buying experience. You can just, if you can, start to copy what some of these others have done. You don't necessarily need to innovate it on your own like you do in the service world.
I think Russ is right on. I also think Mike Jackson may have been wrong. But I just want to point out a stat that I love from Toyota. If you've ever bought a Toyota, you get Toyota Care for the first 3 years, which is free maintenance, as long as you take it to a Toyota dealership. And Toyota will tell you less than 20% of the consumers come back to the Toyota dealership the first year for free maintenance, right? They're taking it to Jiffy Lube, and they're paying $19.99 because that's what's in their head as a faster way to service their vehicle. And the number drops off into single digits after the second year. I think Russ is absolutely correct, and that they have to streamline the process. I think the one bullet that maybe they have in their gun is controlled by the OEM a little bit, and that's the telematics in the car. And if they can find or figure out a way to get to the consumer before the consumer knows that there's something wrong with the vehicle, and then streamline the process to have it repaired, then that gives that dealer a leg up over a consumer waiting for something to appear on their dash and then taking it to the nearest repair facility. So I think the OEMs and the dealers need to work really strategically on the communication around telematics and get the consumer back in the store.
Thank you both. I think I'm going to get fired if I allow any more questions. So feel free to come up and talk to the panelists after. Thank you all so much again for joining us today, and have a great time at the conference.